There's something happening today that I want you to pay close attention to. Not because I'm going to tell you something dramatic or something that requires you to change everything about your life right now, but because if you've been sitting on something, a feeling, a truth, a sentence you've rehearsed 100 times in your head but never actually said out loud, today might be the day that it finally starts to come out. And I don't mean that in a vague, mystical way. I mean it in the most grounded, real, human way possible, because something shifted in the sky today. March 17th, 2026. Mars entered Gemini. And if you know anything about what Mars in Gemini does to people, then you already understand why so many conversations are about to get very, very honest. Let me explain what I mean. Mars is the planet of action. It's the part of us that pushes, that drives, that says enough is enough and moves. It's the energy behind every decision you've ever made when you finally stopped waiting. Mars is the force that gets things done. And for the last several weeks, Mars was moving through Taurus, a sign that is slow, deliberate, sometimes stubborn, a sign that holds on, that waits, that processes quietly and doesn't rush anything. So if you felt recently like something inside you was building, like pressure behind a door, that was Mars in Taurus doing exactly what it does, holding, containing, keeping things tight. But today, that door opens. Mars in Gemini is a completely different energy. Gemini is the sign of the voice, the mind, the messenger. It rules words, conversations, ideas, communication, and the way we express ourselves to the world around us. And when the planet of action, the planet of drive and forward movement, enters the sign of the voice, things that were held back start to move. Words that were stuck start to surface. Conversations that were postponed start to feel urgent. And here's the thing I want you to really sit with for a moment. How long have you been holding something in? I'm not talking about a minor complaint or a passing frustration. I'm talking about something real, something that lives in that quiet space in your chest where you store the things you haven't said yet. Maybe it's something you need to say to someone else. Maybe it's something you need to admit to yourself. Maybe it's a truth about your life, your relationship, your job, your path. Something you've been circling around for weeks or months or maybe even years, always finding a reason to wait just a little bit longer. Because there's always a reason to wait, isn't there? You wait because the timing doesn't feel right. You wait because you don't want to upset someone. You wait because you're not sure how it will land. You wait because part of you is hoping that if you just give it a little more time, maybe the situation will resolve itself and you won't have to say anything at all. You wait because saying it out loud makes it real, and as long as it stays inside, you can still pretend you haven't fully decided, haven't fully felt it, haven't fully arrived at the place you've arrived at. But here's the truth. You already know. You already feel it. That thing that's been sitting quietly in the back of your mind for all this time. You already know what it is. You've known for a while. And today's energy, this Mars moving into Gemini right now, is not creating that knowing. It's just making it harder to ignore. I want to tell you about 3 kinds of things that tend to come out during a transit like this. 3 kinds of truths that people carry around for too long, and what it actually looks and feels like when they finally start to surface. The first one is something you've needed to say to someone else for a long time. Think about the conversations you've been avoiding, the message you started typing and then deleted, the phone call you almost made but talked yourself out of, the thing you wanted to say to your partner at dinner but swallowed because it just didn't feel like the right moment, the response you drafted to a friend's text, read back over, and then replaced with something neutral and safe. The thing you wanted to tell your boss, your coworker, your parent, your sister, your old friend, but kept deciding wasn't worth the tension. There's a version of you that knows exactly what needs to be said, and that version of you has been very patient. I think about a situation that so many people find themselves in. You're in a friendship or a relationship where something shifted a while back and both people kind of know it, but nobody has said it directly. There's this awkward politeness that fills in the space where honesty used to live. Every interaction is slightly filtered. You both say the right things, but somehow the realness is gone. And neither of you addresses it because addressing it would mean acknowledging that something changed, and that feels like too big of a conversation to open. So instead, you orbit each other in this polite, distant, careful way. And the longer it goes on, the harder it seems to break the pattern. Until one day, usually when some kind of external pressure builds up, one of you says something real, and suddenly the air in the room shifts completely. Because it was never the conversation itself that was scary. It was the anticipation of it. It was the idea of it. The actual conversation, when it finally happens, almost always turns out to be far less catastrophic than the version of it you'd been rehearsing in your head. Mars entering Gemini today creates that kind of pressure, not a destructive pressure, a clarifying one. The kind that makes you realize you've spent more energy managing a situation than you would have spent just being honest about it from the beginning. And I think a lot of people are going to start noticing that in the coming days. Situations where they've been very carefully managing something, carefully choosing words, carefully avoiding topics, carefully keeping the peace. And suddenly that careful management starts to feel exhausting in a way it didn't before. Not because anything external has changed, but because the energy available to maintain it has shifted. That's what Mars in Gemini does. It doesn't have the patience for carefully managed silences. The second kind of truth that tends to come out during a transit like this is something you've needed to say to yourself. This one is subtler, and in some ways, it's more important. Because the conversations we avoid having with other people are often downstream of the conversations we've been avoiding having with ourselves. The reason you haven't told your friend that the friendship feels different is because you haven't fully admitted to yourself that you've outgrown it. The reason you haven't told your boss how you feel about your job is because you haven't fully acknowledged to yourself that this isn't where you want to be anymore. The reason you haven't addressed something in your relationship is because addressing it would require you to decide what you actually want. And deciding what you actually want is terrifying. So we avoid the internal conversation first. We stay busy. We scroll. We work. We distract ourselves. We focus on other people's problems. We make ourselves indispensable to other people's lives so we don't have to sit in the quiet and listen to what our own life is trying to tell us. And then the quiet catches up with us anyway. I've noticed something about how people describe the moments when a truth finally breaks through after a long period of suppression. They almost always describe it as a feeling of tiredness first. Not dramatic, not a breakdown, just a very quiet, bone-deep exhaustion with the weight of not saying it. Like their body finally decided it had carried the thing long enough and was simply ready to put it down. If you've been feeling tired lately, not just physically, but that particular kind of emotional tiredness that doesn't go away after sleep, pay attention to that, because that tiredness is often the signal that some part of you is ready to stop carrying it, ready to say it to yourself first, and maybe then to someone else. Mars in Gemini today is activating that signal for a lot of people. The inner voice that you've been turning down is going to get louder, not aggressive, not harsh, just persistently clearer. Like the volume is being turned up slowly and steadily, and no matter how much you try to talk over it, it keeps cutting through. The third kind of truth that tends to surface during a transit like this is something you've needed to say about who you actually are now. This one is interesting because it's not about a specific conversation or a specific problem. It's about identity, about the gap between who you've been presenting yourself as and who you've actually become. Because people change. We change quietly, gradually, without making any official announcements. And sometimes we look up one day and realize that the version of ourselves that other people know, the version we've been performing for them, is actually a few years out of date. We've grown, we've shifted. Our values have changed, our priorities have changed. The things that feel meaningful to us now are different from the things that felt meaningful before. but we haven't told anyone. We've just kept showing up as the old version because it's familiar and expected and requires less explanation. Maybe you've become someone who needs more space than you used to. Maybe you've become someone who cares less about the things people expected you to care about and more about something entirely different. Maybe you've developed a side of yourself that very few people know about. A quieter side, or a braver side, or a more spiritual side, or a more ambitious side. Something real and true about who you are now that hasn't made it into most of your conversations yet. Mars in Gemini has a way of bridging that gap, of making the authentic version of you more insistent than the performed version. And while that can feel uncomfortable in the moment, because authenticity always carries a risk of disruption, it almost always leads somewhere better. Because the relationships and situations that can hold the real you are always more sustaining than the ones that only hold the version of you that you thought other people wanted. Now, I want to talk about what this might actually look like in your everyday life today and over the coming days, because I think it's important to bring this down from the abstract and into the specific. For some of you, it's going to look like a conversation you didn't plan to have. You're going to be talking to someone, a friend, a partner, a family member, a colleague, about something relatively ordinary, and then, without quite meaning to, you're going to say something true, something real, something that's been sitting behind your carefully managed words for a long time, and it's going to come out more easily than you expected, and the person on the other end might be surprised, and you might feel a little raw afterward. But you're also going to feel lighter, because that's what honesty does. It lightens. For others of you, it's going to look like a message. Mars in Gemini rules written communication just as much as spoken communication. So don't be surprised if today you find yourself opening a conversation you've been putting off, sending a message that's been sitting in your drafts emotionally for weeks, reaching out to someone with something you haven't quite known how to say. The words might come out imperfectly. They might not be the perfectly calibrated, perfectly timed, perfectly worded version you've been waiting to deliver, but they'll be real, and real beats perfect every single time. For others, still, it's going to be completely internal, a realization that lands quietly while you're in the middle of something else. Doing dishes, driving, sitting in a meeting that has nothing to do with it. A thought that rises up out of nowhere and simply stays. A knowing that settles in, and you'll recognize it because it won't feel like a new thought. It'll feel like a thought you've been thinking for a long time that just got permission to be acknowledged. I also want to say something about the fear, because I know that for many of you, the thing that's kept that truth locked away isn't laziness or carelessness. It's fear. Real, legitimate, understandable fear. Fear that saying it will damage something. Fear that being honest will cost you something. A relationship, a sense of security, someone's approval. Fear that once you say it, you can't take it back. Fear that the other person won't respond the way you hope. Fear that the truth you've been carrying will turn out to be more disruptive than the silence was. And I want to acknowledge that fear directly because it deserves to be acknowledged. Those concerns are real. Honesty does carry risk. Conversations do sometimes shift things permanently. Not everything that's said in honesty lands gently. Some truths do create disruption. But here's what I want to offer back to you. The disruption that comes from honesty is almost always more workable than the slow erosion that comes from prolonged silence. Because silence doesn't actually preserve things. It just delays the reckoning while quietly costing you something in the meantime. It costs you presence. It costs you energy. It costs you the intimacy that only exists where honesty lives. The longer we carry the unsaid thing, the more weight it accumulates, and the more that weight seeps into everything else around it. The relationship that's been walking on eggshells around an unsaid truth isn't actually being protected by the silence. It's being slowly hollowed out by it. And this is where today's energy becomes genuinely important. Because Mars in Gemini doesn't just give us the impulse to speak, it also gives us the speed The Gemini energy is quick and agile. It finds the words faster than we expect. It moves past the internal debate and into the actual expression before the fear has time to reassemble its argument for why we should wait a little longer. So if something wants to come out today, let it. Not recklessly, not without care, but without the excessive management and delay and second guessing that has been keeping it contained. I want to share something about what happens in the aftermath of these kinds of honest moments. Because I think sometimes we fixate on the moment of saying it and don't think enough about what comes after. After the honest conversation, after the message is sent, after the truth finally gets said, there is almost always a period of recalibration. Things shift. The dynamic changes. Sometimes the shift is uncomfortable for a little while. Sometimes there's a response you didn't fully anticipate. Sometimes the other person needs time to process what you said. And that discomfort, when it comes, is not a sign that you made a mistake. It's a sign that something real happened. Real things require real adjustment. The discomfort is not a warning signal. It's a transition signal. It means you've moved out of the held position and into a more honest one. And now the world around you is catching up. Give it time. Let the recalibration happen. Trust that what's on the other side of that adjustment is better than what was on the other side of the silence. Mars will be in Gemini for several weeks. This is not a one-day opening. This is an extended window of communication energy that is available to you right now, which means you don't have to do everything today. You don't have to have every overdue conversation in the next 24 hours. But today, right now, is when the energy opens. And there's something to be said for moving when the movement is supported, rather than waiting until you're pushing against the tide again. There's also something interesting that Mars in Gemini does to how we listen as well as how we speak. Because this transit isn't just about what comes out of your mouth. It's about the entire channel of communication being more alive and more active than usual, which means you might also start to hear things differently. Things people have been trying to say to you that you've been partially blocking out. Conversations that have been happening at a surface level might start to feel like they want to go deeper. You might find yourself asking questions you've never thought to ask before. You might find someone else surprising you with a level of honesty that shifts how you see them. Communication becomes multi-directional under this energy. And some of the most important things you discover in the coming weeks might not be things you say. They might be things you finally hear. So stay open, not just for expression, but for reception. Let yourself be surprised. Let someone's truth land in you the way you're hoping yours will land in them. I want to close by saying something to the person who has been carrying something for a very long time. Not days or weeks, but genuinely a long time. Years, maybe. A truth so old it started to feel like part of the furniture. Like something you've lived around for so long that you've almost stopped noticing it's there. Until a moment like this, when the energy shifts and suddenly the weight of it is very present again. To you specifically, this transit is not asking you to do anything dramatic. It's not requiring a grand gesture or a difficult confrontation or a life-altering announcement. It's simply creating a small opening, a softening in the wall that's been holding everything in place. And sometimes all it takes is the smallest acknowledgement, said quietly to yourself in the most honest corner of your own mind, to begin the process of release. You don't have to say it all at once. You don't have to have the whole conversation today, but you can let the truth be true. You can stop working so hard to keep it at a distance. You can let it be exactly what it is and trust that you are capable of handling whatever that means, because you are. You've already been carrying it. Carrying it is actually the harder part. Saying it, when the time is right in the way that feels most true, is almost always the relief. And today, March 17th, 2026, with Mars moving into Gemini and the entire energy of communication becoming charged and active and alive, Today might just be the day the relief begins. Whatever it is you've been holding, you don't have to hold it alone anymore. Let it find its words. Let them come, imperfectly if necessary, slowly if needed, quietly if that's all that's available right now. Let the truth you've been carrying start to breathe a little. That's what this day is offering you. And if something shifted for you while you were listening to this, if something landed or something surfaced, or you found yourself thinking about a specific conversation or a specific truth that felt very personal and very real, I'd love to know about it in the comments. You don't have to share everything, even just telling me what you noticed, what came up for you, what this stirred in you. That kind of honesty in the comments section is its own small act of Mars in Gemini energy, and it means a great deal. If this kind of content resonates with you, if you find value in these slower, more reflective explorations of what's happening astrologically and how it connects to real human experience, then subscribing so you don't miss future videos would be wonderful. There's more of this coming. More honest conversations about the shifts we're moving through collectively and what they mean for you individually. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And take care of yourself today.